name's Steve. I'd like to welcome you to the London Literature Festival. Probably the best named literature festival in the world, I think. Made possible by the support of the whole City Council and the Arts Union, the James Beckett Library Trust, and also the Arts Council. It was put together by Shenmue and Steve's relatively small talk for about 25 minutes, half an hour, and then have a break about 20 minutes so you can review your classes. And then we'll open up conversation so you can ask Alan questions if you want to listen to mine. Also, that's what I was just saying, also there are these forms on the tables, and it really helps the festival to get your feedback. And also helps the festival when they talk of funds as well. It's got this year. And obviously, it's such a vital part of this capital culture, this ecology, that I just really like to see it go on and on. When you get asked to do these gigs, talk to a politician about their books, you usually prepare yourself for the arrival of a very large, very badly written volume full of adjectives and adverbs, and a kind of, often nothing more than a kind of string of after dinner anecdotes, which don't really belong in the book. And you can also be waiting for the large one when it never really comes. You'd be glad to know that I've just spent the last 2 days wandering around the city, putting off finishing this book. I've kind of been reading a bit, then moving to another cafe, and walking through the city with the anticipation of reading more. It's one of the most, it's a really, really well written book. It's a good story, and it's done with more technical expertise than the sound in this book. Anyway, it's he's a really, really good writer with a really, really good style. It was a real pleasure to read a story which, unusually for a biography, tells the story more through the lives of other people than the centre character himself. So, can you tell us, Alan, what was the impulse? A lot of the things that you've talked about have been in the public domain before. You've talked about things in interviews and on Desert Island Discs. But then what impelled you to actually take the enormous commitment of sitting down and working this scene?
Well, I don't think I mentioned it too much, actually, because there is in the Labour Party, there is this kind of Monty Python sketch where, you know, people sitting around together, one says, oh, 25 of us living in a shoebox, luxury, 148 of us in a rolled up newspaper, and all that. So you kind of, you know, you don't want to get into this, my life was harder than yours kind of stuff. So I kept away from that generally, but when the electorate removed us of ministerial office, there was some interest in a sort of Alan Johnson book, and the political memoirs, the Brown Blair years, is a scene that's been well mined now. Madison, Straw, Blair, Tony Blair himself, and a few others have already, Alistair Darling, and I didn't really want to do that. There was an idea that I might do something around, because I'd held 5 cabinet positions, you know, and what's the kind of technical way you deal with a ministerial job, and I didn't fancy that. But my agent said, why don't you tell the full story of your childhood? And that really attracted me, because as anybody knows, if they've lost someone very young, if you get the chance to recreate them on the page, so I wanted to be my mother's biographer, and I wanted to put distance between us. That's why I never call her mother, or I call them Lily and Steve. And it's an enormous privilege to make her live again. So for Lily, there's no memorial or anything. Me and my sister paid £5 that she got from her boyfriend to put a little rose bush in Kensal Rise Cemetery with a little plaque. But we didn't realise it only lasted 5 years and you had to renew the subscription. So there's no trace of her anywhere apart from that book.
And why, I mean, is that the reason that you limit it so tightly to that time? Because, I mean, it's strange that it's a very, very tight canvas. It runs up from their marriage to effectively when you were 18 and just about to get married yourself.
Yes, I wanted to, I mean, it starts with a photograph of Steve and Lily's wedding and ends with a photograph of me and Judy, my first wife, getting married when I was 18. It seemed a natural break. That 18 years was, you know, it was the period of the early 50s I wanted to capture. The place, this street, Southam Street, that actually was photographed by a famous photojournalist called Roger Main, who actually turned up in it. We didn't know he was there, but he came to Southam Street and some of the roads around it in the mid-50s, and he's had exhibitions and books and all that, fabulous photographs, some of which he's still alive, a grand old age, but he gave me permission to put some in the book. So actually, and he records the kind of squalor and all the rest of it, and I wanted to sort of add some text to that, and those two incredible people who just happened to be my mother and my sister. So that was the story. Once Lily had gone, once she died, there was a bit more of it. You know, that was Linda and her efforts to keep us from being separated and put in care. And then it seemed like a natural break at age 18. Someone wrote to me and complained and said they'd bought it because they wanted to read about my political life, but it does say a childhood memoir, so the clue is actually in the title of the book.
The Roger Main pictures kind of show the streets and show the activity in the streets. But one of the things that really struck me reading the book was, I think, Linda's boyfriend and then husband, Mike, coming to see you and being shocked by the conditions and the fact that people in the early 60s were still living in those conditions. It was shocking to me as well, actually, reading the book, thinking where I was at that stage. Can you take us in off Southam Street and into the houses and describe the kind of situation that you were both living in that situation?
Well, this is a part of London, Southam Street, that was kind of jerry-built houses in the 19th century, expecting a population drift that never actually happened. So they were poorly built in the middle of the 19th century. They were condemned as unfit for human habitation in the 30s, and we were still living in them in the 50s. And as I say in the book, I mean, this is just like people in Hull who were living in terrible conditions. It was just normal to you. Everyone around you lived like that. Although in Notting Hill, we never bumped into Hugh Grant or Julia Roberts. There was apparently it got a bit better as you walked up the Portobello Road. But that kind of squalor was generally they would put in as many families as they could. We were fortunate. My mother was with a housing trust called the Row Housing Trust. But you know, Rackman famously was letting out these places. And it was generally, it would be a basement, which you were very unfortunate if you lived in the basement, the ground floor, and then two other floors. About two families to every floor, you know, one room, single room we were in first of all. The kind of things that were common to the time, no central heating, of course, no running hot water, of course, outside toilet that you really wanted to go to, so you had a bucket in the corner that was your latrine, or as we used to call it, a piss pot, but it was a bit indelicate, there was no electricity, it was gas, it was just gas, which is why this splendid cooker behind us here, the original, everything was off of that, so you had to boil your kettles on it, and you had to, which meant in the summer it was terribly hot because you had to keep that going. In the winter, the cold. I mean, I can't describe the cold in these places where you know, pre-central heating. Many people would have had that experience. I tried to capture it for that street, but as I say in the book, 1951 census showed that right across London, the density of more than two people to a room in London was about 3%. In this ward, the Goulburn ward, which included Southam Street, it was 14%. So it had this, for some reason, it had become this terribly poor area and was traditionally a very poor area. And you could think it was still Dickensian times then. You know, there was a kind of real time lapse. And in the end, they pulled these places down. But capturing that period, I think Roger Main's photographs, he does capture the squalor. You know, all the railings pulled off to go for the war effort. What we called the debris on the corner, so the Luftwaffe could have done us a favour by getting rid of the whole street, but they only managed to get rid of 2 houses. And all that, which was very common in Hull, I know, we used to call it the debris, thinking that that was one place on the corner of our street. And the French word, debris, had never entered our, it was a common word right across London. So you had that, you had all of the, I come on to describe the race riots when all these West Indians and people from the Caribbean who were urged to come across to drive our buses and, be porters in our hospitals because there was a labour shortage, they walked into this area, they probably didn't expect a standing ovation, but what they met with was the kind of squalor that we were living in, except there was a much worse kind of extortionate element to it, and eventually the race riots.
And the meat, the fuel was on meters. The food was brought daily.
Yes.
As and when. Talk a bit about the economic situation that your family was in.
Well, no one stored stuff. It would be incredible to think that when you ran out of, stalk margarine, there was another one in the, well, you wouldn't have a fridge, would you? You just live from day to day. And so all those shops, the little corner shops, Berriman's, the corner shop where I say they were really kind to us. I used to have to go in and say, can my mother have this on tick? Can you put it on her bill? And he always did. I don't think he ever let us down. That was part of the community, but the fact that, you couldn't go to one place to get everything. So poor Lily had this terrible heart condition. She had to trail around to get, something from one place, groceries from all over the place. But that was part of the vitality of the community as well. I mean, those Goulburn Road, Portobello Road, all those shops that have now disappeared and been replaced, was part of a community spirit. I mean, my mother, I say in the book, she made me and my sister do errands for the elderly people who lived there. So Mrs. Sudbury, once Linda went to get some bread for her. I used to have to take her milk up from the doorstep. Linda went to get some bread, and she accepted a penny from Mrs. Sudbury, and my mother found out and marched her back. And my mother could have done with that penny, but she marched her back to give it back, because you didn't do those things to get money off of people. You did it to help the community.
So your father was a painter and decorator who didn't do much painting and decorating, but played the piano in pubs, and your mother cleaned. So talk a bit about where the money came from or didn't come from, and the effect that.
Shall I just explain this? So my mother was from a family of 10 in Liverpool. Her mother died when she was 38. My mother had 10 kids by the time she was 38. 2 of them died in infancy of pneumonia following an attack of measles, which was very common in the days pre-immunisation. So when they died as infants, 6, 7 years of age. So her mother had 10 children by the time she was 38 and then died when she was 42. Her mother had died age 42, and my mother was convinced she would die age 42, and she did. But she had rheumatoid arthritis when she was young, rheumatic fever, and that led to something called mitral stenosis, which is something that's easily dealt with now, but it was a terrible heart complaint then. It certainly meant the mitral valve was blocked and blood wasn't going between the chambers of the heart. So she had a very repressive father. After her mother died, she was the kind of eldest daughter. She had to look after this big family. Her father, my grandfather, had pushed her. He saw she was a bright girl, pushed her to pass her scholarship, and then refused to buy the uniform that would have allowed her to go to the school that might have changed her life. So he was a very, very awful character. And my auntie Peggy, who's my mum's younger sister, still lives in the same house, and she verified this. It's not me making it up, what a terrible man he was. So as soon as she could, she left when she was 18 to work for the Co-op in Norris Green in Liverpool. When the war started, she came down to London to join the NAFI, the Navy, Army and Air Force Institute. She met a guy called Willie Dance, and my mother's name was Lillian May, so the joke was Willie Dance, no, but Lillian May, which passed as humour for the Itmar generation. And she was engaged to him for years, and he was killed during the war. Then along came, and then she went out with a guy called Les Foster from Hull, and she really liked Les Foster. But her sister, my auntie Dolly, another one of her younger sisters who'd come down to London to work in a NAFI, nicked Les Foster off of her. They didn't speak for 10 years, and they moved to Hull and had 9 children. So I've got 9 cousins up here, only 2 of whom live in my constituency and are able to vote for me, but that's another issue. So along came Steve Johnson, he would have loved it here. He was a pianist, a brilliant pianist, just had to listen to a piece of music and he could reproduce it. Wore white gloves at the army concerts and could have, Bert Ambrose tried to sign him up for his band, but the condition was Steve would had to have learnt music, and that was too much like hard work for Steve. So he was out playing the pubs and clubs, he gambled, he drank, he knocked my mum about when he came home. Lily made a big mistake. And so she, who shouldn't have been scrubbing and cleaning and doing all the charring jobs that she had to do that to get some money in, because we didn't get anything off of Steve. And he deserted her in the end when I was 8, 1958. He ran off, which was the happiest day, for my sister and I, it was the happiest day in our lives. You know, we couldn't understand why my mum was sitting there sobbing. She realised this wasn't the end of the hard times, this was the start of a new hard time. And, you know, the way that women then, I mean, this was post-emancipation, pre-equal opportunities. You know, a woman in the 1950s couldn't sign a hire purchase agreement if she was married without her husband being there with her. He had to sign it for her. You couldn't rent a radio or a telly without your husband being there with you. And there was always this stigma. If you were married and your husband went, well, it's your fault that you were deserted. And, you know, it was really difficult for her. She didn't know where he'd gone. She didn't know how to get anything off of him. She was really upset. And she realised that it was going to be a much harder time for her, even than when Steve was there, whereas we were walking around cheering. And she, you know...
So despite her condition and despite being told by doctors not to work, she had to take on mostly cleaning jobs, some shop jobs too.
She did. Well, I mean, she wasn't very good. What little money she had, she wasn't very good with them. So the tallyman was always coming round with his raincoat and his ledger, and we had to learn to hide when he knocked on the door and all that. So that was one way she was trying to keep things together. She had to go and she should have been living in those conditions with mitral stenosis, and she had to go and do all these jobs, cleaning and working for these families in the posh end of Ladbroke Grove and all that. Some of whom were very kind to her, by the way. And it wasn't just one job, you know, it was 2, 3, 4 jobs. Goodness knows how much she was paid. It would have been a pittance. But, you know, she had to do that to keep things together.
I think, I don't want to paint a really miserable picture of this book, because one of the very skillful things you do is it isn't misery literature. You know, there's always hope. And you've just mentioned 2 of the things that really stick out for me, which is your dad's refusal to learn how to read music, which could have transformed your lives, and your grandfather's refusal to let Lily take the scholarship, which would have transferred her life.
Yeah.
But in the book there are other heroes, not just Lily and Linda, but other heroes who did come out of that community.
Absolutely.
Well,
for instance, just going back to those posh houses at Ladbroke Grove. So my mother was distraught, didn't know where to find Steve. She cleaned for a woman called Mrs. Den, D-E-H-N. And Mrs. Den had 3 sons who were all professionals. One was a journalist, one was a solicitor, one was a stockbroker, and they had a flat. And Lily had to clean for them. She didn't have to, but she had the job of cleaning for them as well. And one day when she was in the flat, she thought she was on her own and she just broke down and cried. And one of the brothers came back, and he was the journalist, and he heard Lily crying and said, "What's the matter?" So she told him that Steve had gone. She didn't know how to get hold of him. Well, it's a good question. No, it wasn't actually, but yeah, she saw the advantage. I mean, she marched us to Ladbroke Grove Library as soon as we were old enough to turn a page. So books, she always thought that, you know, books would be the escape for us. She would have been very, very disappointed if we'd failed that 11 plus, both Linda and me. Linda was 3 years older than me. And, you know, we didn't want her to be upset with us, so that was kind of one reason why we worked very hard at it. The other was, the school that I would have gone to if I hadn't passed was Isaac Newton, which doubtless the teachers did their best, but the way that system went, all the money and all the best of everything went to the grammar schools, and the schools that weren't grammar schools got the worst of everything. And Isaac Newton was, you know, notorious as a boys' school, as a terrible school, so I didn't want to go there. So she did all that, she pushed us to do that, but the grammar school wasn't my escape. I mean, me and Sloane didn't have a very good relationship. I left as soon as I could when I was 15. I wasn't there very often, but one of the teachers, as often happens, you know, the English teacher, Mr. Carlin, he shaped all my reading and all of that. But, you know, I left there, tried to be a rock star, failed, and then became a postman. So there was no kind of, for most of my colleagues, I suppose, in Parliament, who've had a very difficult life. David Blunkett, born blind, and then his dad died in a horrendous accident in the steelworks when he was 5. Jack Straw comes from a very modest background. David Davis never knew who his father was, born on a council estate in Wandsworth. The change for them was university, I suppose. But I didn't go to university. The change for me was books, was reading.
And you also mentioned other things, music and football.
Music
three
and
things.
Queen's Park Rangers, unfortunately, yeah.
But there's that curious mixture of the seeds of all those interests did come from
My father, yeah. Well, I say credit where credit's due. So me and Linda got the music gene, and although, you know, he had a piano. It was always an old honky-tonk piano in the corner, but he kept it locked. He wouldn't let us get anywhere near it. Linda prized it open with a screwdriver once he'd gone. But so, you know, music, that we got that from him, no doubt about that. He had the program, battered, torn, handbook. Football clubs used to produce handbooks. He had the handbook for the 46-47 Queen's Park Rangers season, which, as everyone knows, is the season they were promoted from the 3rd Division South to the 2nd Division. That's common knowledge, I know. Well, and he gave that to me, and that started the kind of Queen's Park Rangers thing. And he was also, there's a club called the Cobden Club in Notting Hill, which is now a whizzy music place. Then it was a working men's club, the Cobden Club. And they had a Christmas party for kids every year, always in the middle of January. We could never work out why, but it was middle of January was their Christmas party. And Steve was the master of ceremonies, so he was on the piano and all that. And we got a book. Every time you went, you got a book. So for those years between about 54 and 56, 57, we got these books. I got Robinson Crusoe, Linda got Little Women, I got Tom Sawyer, I got A Boy's Own Annual, and they were my little library, and I read and reread them. So in a way, it wasn't just my mum taking us to the library, it was Steve, you know, hosting the Cobden Club.
And the other, it's interesting hearing you talk so much about this being a memorial to Lily, because one of the legacies of this book is the biography of Linda as well, who is the most extraordinary young person. Your mother died when you were 12. Do you want to talk a bit about what went on over that and the operation, and also then Linda kicking into gear, which was just amazing?
She was incredible. Linda, I mean, when I say we were happy when my father left, Linda, when she was 10, 11, used to wait up with my mother to protect her when he came back, to try and stop him knocking her around. In fact, she tried to stab him with a Girl Guide penknife once, which I hope the police don't reopen the case on it. But so she matured very quickly. And then the debts that my mother had run up, so Mr. Berriman's at the corner, Linda went to work for Mr. Berriman from age 12 on a weekend, Saturday and Sunday, not for any money for herself, but to get my mum's debts down. This mitral stenosis, because we were in West London, there's a hospital, Hammersmith Hospital, which was kind of one of our local hospitals, but it's a world-leading heart hospital. And they said to Lily, look, there's an operation now for a mitral valve, a duplicate, a substitute mitral valve, which we can fix. It's a groundbreaking operation. Very few people have had it done, and we want, this will extend your life. And my mother was really, really worried about this. She just turned 42 when her mother died and her grandmother died. Linda, I was always the kind of weakling in the corner, but Linda was saying to her, don't you want to live to see your grandchildren? This will extend your life by 20, 30 years. And in the end, she was so ill that kind of it was the only way out. She signed the consent forms and she didn't survive the operation. Then Linda, who's now 50, she just left school and she was working as a nursery nurse. So, we said, well, what do we do now? Our mother's dead. We had relatives in Liverpool who were keen for us to go there, but, we wanted to stay in London. Linda said, just keep your head down, say nothing. Otherwise the authorities will come and split us up. And so the problem with that is 2 weeks after my mother died, she'd waited on a council house waiting list all of her life, and suddenly came the offer of a council house 2 weeks after she'd died in Welwyn Garden City. So the kind of authorities had discovered us. Linda marched round to the council and said, my mum's dead, but me and my brother will take this. And they said, don't be stupid. You're only 15, your brother's 8. You'll have to go into care. You have to be 21 to have a council house. So they said, we'll send a social worker around to you. So Linda came back. She was making all these plans that we'd barricade ourselves in the house, and they'd have to, because they were going to pull our house down. She said they'll have to pull it down around us, and I knew we'd be easier to move than the old piano in the corner. But they sent round this social worker, Mr. Pepper, who is a hero in our lives, but it started badly. Mr. Pepper came in. He'd obviously worked on this a bit, and he gave this little presentation, and he said to Linda, well, you're training to be a nursery nurse. You'll go to Dr. Bernardo's in Barking, where you'll continue your training, but you'll be a resident there. I've found a foster family near Allen School in Chelsea, and they're very keen to move him in. We can move him in next week. And sort of sat back with a smug look on his face. And in went Linda, standing there, hands on hips, with her finger in front of his nose. Because he said, you can't live on your own. She said, we've been living on our own for years, So she sent him away with a flea in his ear. And he came back, Mr. Pepper, and God knows what he had to go through, what machinations or risks he had to take. But he came back and said, right, I've found you a council place. You have to find someone over 21 who's a London County Council resident who will be your guarantor. You have to accept that I'm coming round at least once a week to, watch over you. And so Linda said that was acceptable to her. And she went off to look at this place. I didn't see it. She went to look at it. And she told me it was, they thought 2 young kids were given the worst place we could possibly get rid of onto these two. Apparently they'd taken the doors off to burn as firewood. It was a horrible place.
It's on the 10th floor of a
block of flats. So Linda rings up Mr. Pepper puts her forms in the phone box, and he thought he was going to get, this whole thank you so much. And she said, we're not accepting it. He said, what do you mean you're not accepting it? You can't negotiate with me. She said, you go there and look at it, and come and see, if you think you can live there with your family, come and look me in the eyes and tell me, and I'll think about it again. And we never heard about it again. So the next thing was we got an offer of a number 11 Pitt House on the Wordsworth estate in Battersea, which meant we had to cross to south of the Thames, which was a big trauma for us, obviously. But apart from that, it was traumatic. It was a sort of decent masonette, indoor bathroom and toilet. So we came originally once. Linda would cook this big tea, which was nothing like the food we had most of the week, but she booked it for Mr. Pepper. And in the end, he came once a month, and then he came once every 3 or 4 months. He realised that we were going to be okay.
And there's a lovely refrain all through that period when everybody you meet says, where's the adult?
Yeah, we run out of them, we said, yeah.
So then, let's move on to Linda marries, moves to Watford, and you start your glorious musical career. Do you want to talk a bit about...
Which is not finished yet, incidentally. I'm singing a couple of guitars here. So Linda, Mike, who was an incredible hero in this, as I said, he paid for that rose bush that we put dedicated to our mother. She was going out with him just at the time when my mother was going into hospital for this last operation. We lived together, but she was going to Watford at weekends. so I was, I was shelf stacking at Tesco's and doing other things, but getting involved in the music scene in London with my band, The Area, which is a mod band, decent band, played to 1,000 people at Aylesbury College, which was the highlight of our careers. Then we had all our gear nicked. She said, look, I'm marrying, moving to Watford. Do you want to come with us? I said, I'm not going to the countryside. I mean, Watford was Cornwall to me. So I wouldn't go. She was really upset about it. She was really upset when I left school at 15, really upset that I didn't go to... Linda used to come to my... when you come to meet the teachers, right. It was Linda sitting there at, 3 years older than me. But I wasn't going to leave London. So I went back to live with the Coxes in Notting Hill. And they were very kind to me. They gave me a room with that. They had 2 sons and a daughter, and I sort of squeezed in to the son's bedroom. And then I formed the second band. I didn't form, the second band was semi-professional and was multiracial, which was incredible for the mid-60s, 67. They had a fabulous girl singer, Carmen, who was half Indian and half German. And I used to sing, if you can imagine this, Wild Thing, while she danced around me. I thought we were great. And we had a manager, and because I'd had my amplifier nicked when the first time, but my Hofner very thin guitar I'd taken home with me, so I didn't get that nicked. And we were really on the verge of a contract. The guy who manages Small Faces and all that came to see us. They were going to do a little film about us. Right? I was working in another supermarket at the time. They were going to come in and film us. And then we had all of our gear.
You were very unlucky.
I said we should have been called the victims rather than the in-betweens. They nicked the whole lot, including my guitar. And by that time, I'd met someone who I wanted to get married to. And so while all my mates were rushing away from family life, I was quite keen to get into it. So I thought, I'm not going to make it. I'll return to this another time. And I went to be a postman.
The amazing thing about reading this book is that it's like a training course for the offices that you later held when you were a politician in education, health, home life, because you had a lot of experience of crime.
I did, yeah.
Which was so. But in writing the book, you resist, apart from one reference to the 11 plus, and the fact that that's still an issue that some people would like to go back to. You refrain from any linking it with what happened afterwards. Now, I wonder, was that difficult, or was
No,
that
it wasn't difficult. It wasn't difficult once you put your mind to writing a book that you want people to read, and if they don't know anything about you whatsoever, So, I mean, really, it was about Lily and Linda. And for me to intrude with things that happened later, I think it wouldn't have been the same kind of book. And so I resisted that temptation. And I think really, from most of the biographies that I read, it's actually best if they follow the order along and don't keep jumping to something that happens in the future. If you're in the period of Notting Hill in the 50s, you don't suddenly want to jump to some issue about student fees in the 2004 or whatever. So I think I thought it worked, and if I thought it worked, then I was happy to do it that way.
And finally, in this half, I was interested. A lot of writers have other writers sitting on their shoulders when they do things. They're influences that help them make the kind of decisions that you make very well about word choice and plot. Were there other writers there for you?
Other writers who've inspired me,
Yeah.
certainly.
See, that's what he does. He uses not crap language like very complicated stuff. So what writers inspired you?
Well, loads of writers have inspired me, but in terms of writing that book, there's a guy called Simon Gray, who's a great playwright. He wrote these books called The Smoking Diaries. Have you read them? I mean, they're absolutely brilliant. And I liked that kind of style that he wrote in, which, in a sense, influenced the way I tried to write as well, which is, not loads of adverbs and adjectives and all the rest of it, and to try and strip it down to as clear a paragraph as you can get. So I worked hard at that, and because I'm a reader, I wanted it, to write something that I would be keen to read. So he was a big influence on me. I won't mention anyone else, because if I mention anyone else, it sounds like I'm trying to, I think I'm
No, you
saying
deserve it,
planes.
go on.
All right, George Orwell is one of my real heroes. There's a guy now who's done a book, Damien Barr's, called Maggie and Me, which you ought to read. I mean, he actually, I think, although I haven't read him and he didn't influence that book, he would influence writing in the future, because I think he's done it spot on. I think he's done it better than I did, actually.
Okay, well, I really would recommend this book. Often you say things you don't mean on stage, but it's a great pleasure to be able to say that this was a fantastic read. At the end, you'll be able to buy them and Alan will sign them. But we're going to take a 20-minute break now so you can refill your glasses. And then we'll come back and you can answer all the questions you were hoping I would ask. Thanks very much.